So we start our discussion about theories with psychoanalytical identity theory, which of course was developed by Freud. And that's what's known as being a phallocentric theory. So I want you to understand the concept of phallocentric. That's Latin, and if you were to break it into the two roots, you would look at phallo and centric. Centric means centered, to be centered around or center of. Phallus is referring to the male penis. So the idea that Freud's theory was phallocentric means, again, just like Aristotle's theories, that it's centered around maleness being the norm. So the basic idea behind psychoanalytic identity theory is the personality components and the development of personality. So first, speaking of the three components of personality, there's the id, the ego, and the superego. Now the id is responsible for our animalistic or our primal urges. Things like our sexual desires or greed or our desire to have pleasure. Those all are centered in the id. The ego, on the other hand, is our rational system. And because it's rational, it helps control the id. So this rational system helps keep us out of trouble. It makes us think twice about doing something just because it might be pleasurable or just because we think we want it. And then the superego also allows us to have some control over the id. The superego is our moral sense of personality. It's our sense of right and wrong. And so if you look at the illustration on the left, here's somebody thinking about something that they want or something that they want to do, and they've got these three different competing voices inside their personality. The id saying, I want it now. The ego saying, I need to do a bit of planning to get it. And the superego saying, no, you can't have it. It's not right. That's our sense of morality. Psychoanalytic identity theory also is based on the idea that there are 5 stages of development, that children go through predictable developmental stages. So Freud developed this schema of the 5 stages of the oral stage, the anal stage, the phallic stage, the latent stage, and the genital stage. Each one of these lasted a certain amount of time. Now, while Freud may have not been 100% right in determining these ideas that there are oral and anal and phallic stages or latent stages, he certainly was one of the first theorists to recognize that children go through more or less developmental windows. It's not just that one goes through a stage, it's that a child has this developmental window of opportunity where they can grow in certain ways. And if those developmental windows are missed, then the child's full development, their full personality development, may not be as complete or may not be as well developed as a child who's actually been able to engage appropriately at the right time in those developmental opportunities or through those developmental windows of opportunity. So according to Freud, a child from age birth to 1 year went through what he called the oral stage. Now what Freud believed was that the child received gratification, he called it oral gratification, up to 1 year of age. So when you think about it, well, Freud may have not been 100% accurate. His observation actually was. When you think about all mammals, any creature that is a mammal, that is an infant, whether it's a human being or a dog or a horse or a mouse, it's dependent on being able to nurse off of its mother. That's why they're mammals. And so every mammal is born with what's known as a suckling reflex. And that suckling reflex, if the infant, if the baby mammal, the young creature, doesn't have that suckling reflex, it's not going to be able to receive nourishment from its mother. So Freud was correct in observing that there was this oral stage. He thought it had to do with personality development, while really it was a biological instinct that's part of all mammals, all of these species, their ability to be able to survive. Freud also thought that from 1 to 2 years, a child received most of its gratification through defecation, that this was the anal stage of development. The reason why it was so important at this point in time for Freud to be able to present this theory and advance this theory is because 150 years ago, when Freud was developing these theories, there were very few modern conveniences. We didn't have disposable diapers, we didn't have indoor plumbing. So most parents were in a hurry to push their children into toilet training or potty training. Of course, you wouldn't use a toilet as we know it today, but you would use a chamber pot, and you would have control of your ability to defecate and urinate. So it was really important for parents to encourage their children for this toilet training or potty training. And it was Freud who realized that children couldn't be potty trained earlier than 2 years. If any of you have little brothers or sisters or nieces or nephews, you know that potty training starts at 2 years and really goes through age 3 or 4 until the child is somewhere between 2 and 2.5 years of age, that they don't have the neurological development to control their bowels or to be able to control urination, and they don't have the mental capacity to be able to understand how to use the bathroom. Well, Freud didn't really understand why this was occurring. He observed that it was occurring, and he tried to develop theories around what he had observed. Freud's phallic stage of development was from 3 to 6 years, and again, it was based on his observation of children. So any of you who've had little children in your family, you've been around 3, 5, and 6-year-olds, which sometimes touch themselves inappropriately. And so what Freud was observing was that children begin to explore themselves. They become aware that they have genitals, and they start exploring. And so Freud thought that this was a stage of development that all children would go through. And so he was normalizing this kind of behavior. Even though parents wanted to teach their children to have control, what was socially acceptable or unacceptable, Freud was explaining to parents, well, yes, you have to teach them control, but this is a normal stage that they will be going through. The latency phase is from 6 years to puberty, and that's the stage where children learn to suppress their urges. So latency is referring to children's ability to learn how to suppress these natural urges. And again, just common sense, it usually is from 6 years to about puberty that children learn self-control. They learn that, no, they can't have that third cookie, or they can't take their schoolmates' toys, and they can't hit their little brother or sister over the head just because they don't like having them around. It's that ability to learn how to suppress one's inner urges or inner instincts or anything that you might have a tendency to do because it isn't socially acceptable. And then according to Freud, the final stage was the genital stage. When a child starts to mature, they start to develop their secondary sexual characteristics such as hair or deepening of the voice. Girls start to develop hips, boys start to develop more muscles. And so according to Freud, that was the phase that you went through as you started to mature in puberty. So Freud also developed theories regarding the development of sexual identities and sexual maturity in children. He created a developmental process for both boys and girls. For boys, he created what he called or labeled the Oedipus complex. So according to Freud, what happened to young boys was during their phallic stage, the boys started to begin to see their father as a rival. And because the child was envisioning the father as a rival, he then developed a fear of his father. Freud also thought that young boys would develop what he called a castration complex or fear of castration. So that idea flows from the previous thought is that the boy is engaging in this relationship where he thinks he is a rival with his father. Of course, he may be a rival for his mother's attention, but he's not really a rival for her sexual attention, or shouldn't be. But because of that rivalry, the child is afraid of their father because they think that if their father finds them out, then their father might decide that they should be castrated. So this is Freud's theory. Freud believed that eventually boys would learn to either fear or have contempt for their mother. And again, all of this was wrapped up in what Freud labeled as the Oedipus complex. For girls, he thought that they developed through what a process he labeled as penis envy. And so Freud thought that girls would start to have envy that they didn't have a penis, but their brothers did, or that other young males did. What Freud was probably observing was the fact that young women envied the social status or the opportunities that other young males had. They didn't actually have penis envy, but they were envying their social status and opportunities. However, Freud believed that if a young lady went properly through what he labeled the Electra complex, that would then stifle that woman's desire for a penis and instead replace that desire with the desire for a baby or to have children. Freud also believed that young women made the father a love object because they realized that their father had the capacity to impregnate them. Now, while Freud's ideas may not have much favor in contemporary times, all of these ideas have been thought to be false. At the same time, he's one of the first theorists to really look at the social world and to relate that social world to the experiences that his patients were having. And he tried to develop theories that substantiated both his clients' perspectives and observation and his observations of the social world. So ultimately, Freud believed that there would be a final end result for both boys and girls, that they would develop certain types of characteristics. And those characteristics were dependent on whether they went through the Oedipus complex or the Electra complex. So according to Freud, boys would develop a masculine identity. Eventually, they would develop either contempt or fear of their mother, and then they would develop a strong superego or strong sense of morality. On the other hand, Freud believed that girls would develop a feminine identity. Now, both the idea of a masculine identity and a feminine identity is tautological reasoning. It's circular reasoning. Girls would also develop certain characteristics such as a sense of inferiority, a tendency towards jealousy of other women, a desire for a child, an obsession with sexual attractiveness. Now, when you think of all of those 4 characteristics, you might also try to understand that that was partly because of women's limited roles in society. Women had to compete for men, so they developed jealousy towards each other. Their most important social role might be the attachment that they had to a male. They become obsessed with their sexual attractiveness because that is partly how they compete for that male in their life. And they develop a tendency towards jealousy because they're competing with each other constantly. The sense of inferiority also comes because of their lack of social opportunities. Freud's also very heavily criticized because he believed that for a woman to become mature, fully mature, that she needed to have a vaginal orgasm instead of a clitoral orgasm. So many feminist theorists criticize Freud because they state that he put women in rejection of their own sexual selves. Their own sexual pleasure was denounced by Freud. Freud also believed that women became masochistic. Masochism refers through deriving sexual pleasure through pain, and it may have been that women's sexual experiences were so non-pleasurable during the late 1800s when Freud was writing this that in order to have a sexual relationship, there had to be a certain amount of pain or unpleasantness that was associated with it. So again, most of this is all tautological or circular reasoning. So Freud, you have to ask yourself, was he the hero for coming up with these ideas of developmental stages, for awakening the public to certain ideas, or is he the goat for so inaccurately representing people's, particularly women's, life experiences in the late 1800s?